Y'all, this one is wild. Imagine working your whole life for something, only for a bunch of haters to try and take it from you. But trust me, this Black Queen was not about to let that slide. Go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. What would you have done in her situation? Let's get into it. Ruth Simmons had spent 20 years climbing the corporate ladder, breaking her back for companies that saw her as nothing more than a diversity statistic. She had the degrees, the experience, and the drive, but no matter how much she gave, it was never enough. She was the woman they always overlooked for the promotion, the one whose ideas were stolen in boardrooms, whose voice had to be twice as loud just to be half as heard. And after 2 decades of microaggressions, backhanded compliments, and the silent, suffocating pressure of proving herself over and over again, she was done. She took her severance package, cashed out her 401k, and bought herself a farm in rural Georgia. It wasn't easy. Banks didn't like lending to single Black women, especially ones leaving six-figure jobs for a little land. The old men at the farm supply store raised their eyebrows when she asked about irrigation. The white folks in town either ignored her or watched her too closely, waiting for her to fail. But Ruth didn't fail. She worked her land like she had worked her career, with grit, discipline, and the kind of determination that made people nervous. She learned the soil, the seasons, the way the air smelled before rain. Her hands, once used to typing emails and signing contracts, grew rough from digging, planting, and harvesting. She built something for herself, something real, and now someone was trying to take it from her. It started small, missing vegetables, a few stolen eggs. Then a sack of grain disappeared from her storage shed. She told herself it was nothing, that maybe she just miscounted. But when she found one of her goats with a fresh cut along its side, not from an animal, but from a blade, she knew this wasn't random. Someone was sneaking onto her land, and Ruth Simmons wasn't about to let them get away with it. Ruth sat on her porch, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, staring out at the land she had fought so hard for. The morning sun stretched across the fields, casting long shadows over the crops she had planted with her own hands. This was her dream, her escape. But now the past was creeping back in, uninvited. She had left behind the corporate world's cutthroat politics, the endless cycle of proving herself to men in tailored suits who smiled in her face but dismissed her in meetings. She had left behind the exhaustion of code switching, of swallowing her anger, of being told she was intimidating just for standing her ground. She had come here to breathe, to build something for herself. But even here, it seemed, she wasn't allowed peace. Ruth glanced at the fresh wound on her goat's side. The blood dried into its white fur. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't just theft. This was a message. Someone wanted her scared. Someone wanted her gone. And she had a good idea who. She thought back to the first day she set foot in town, walking into the farm co-op store, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes on her. How the cashier, a middle-aged white man with a beer belly and nicotine-stained fingers, had asked her 3 times if she was lost. How the local farmer, Clint Weaver, had scoffed when she asked about the best soil amendments for her land. "You really think you got what it takes to farm out here?" he had said, his smile just shy of a sneer. "Ain't exactly like pushing papers in an office." She had smiled back, sharp and steady. "Good thing I'm a fast learner." That had been a year ago. Since then, she had proven them all wrong. Her farm was thriving. She had outgrown the whispers, the side eyes, the skepticism. But now, with her crops being stolen, her animals attacked, she knew somebody wasn't done trying to push her out. A rustling noise broke her thoughts. Ruth's eyes flicked toward the cornfield. It was too early for the wind to be moving like that. She set her mug down. She had spent her whole life defending what was hers. She wasn't about to stop now. Tonight, she'd be ready. That night, Ruth didn't sleep. She sat in the darkened kitchen, her hands wrapped around a hunting knife she had bought at a flea market months ago. The shotgun leaned against the counter, fully loaded. She had thought about calling the sheriff, but she knew how that would go. A Black woman calling in to report stolen crops, injured livestock. They'd take their time getting out here, if they came at all. No, this was something she had to handle herself. She pulled on her boots and slipped outside. The night was thick with humidity. the kind that made the air feel heavy in her lungs. Crickets chirped, the occasional hoot of an owl breaking the silence. The cornfield loomed ahead, the stalks swaying gently. Ruth moved carefully, staying low as she made her way toward the storage shed. She had left the door slightly ajar on purpose, a trap. If someone came back for more, they'd take the bait. A noise, soft but distinct. Footsteps on dirt. Her pulse quickened. She pressed herself against the wooden wall of the shed, listening. There it was again, the sound of someone moving, trying to be quiet but not quiet enough. Then a whisper. "Come on, hurry up." Ruth's grip tightened around the knife. There were two of them. She exhaled slowly, her heartbeat steadying. She had faced worse than this before. Boardrooms full of men who underestimated her. Bosses who took credit for her ideas. She had learned to fight in a world that wanted her to shrink, and now it was her land on the line. She stepped out of the shadows. "Didn't your mama teach you not to steal?" she said, her voice low and sharp. She stepped out of the shadows. "Didn't your mama teach you not to steal?" she said, her voice low and sharp. The figures froze. Two young men, maybe late teens, stood near the shed. One had a burlap sack slung over his shoulder. The other was reaching for something in his waistband. Ruth didn't hesitate. She lifted the shotgun, aiming just past them, and pulled the trigger. Boom! The blast echoed through the night, sending a flock of birds screeching into the sky. The boys dropped everything and ran, one stumbling over his own feet, the other scrambling through the dirt like a rat fleeing a flood. Ruth watched them go, her hands steady. Let them run. Let them be scared. She wasn't leaving. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, Ruth found the evidence they had left behind, a crowbar, a half-empty pack of cigarettes, and a boot print too big to belong to those boys. They weren't working alone. She had suspected as much. Those kids were just foot soldiers, sent by someone who thought they could bully her off her own land. Someone who had been watching her. And Ruth had a damn good idea who that someone was. By noon, she was in town, marching straight into Weaver's Feed and Supply, where Clint Weaver and his crew liked to sit around and pretend they still ran things. The little bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside. The conversation died. 4 men sat near the counter, their coffee cups halfway to their lips, eyes locking onto her like she didn't belong. Clint was among them, leaning back in his chair, his thumbs hooked into his belt. "Well, well," he drawled, setting his cup down. "Ain't this a surprise?" Ruth didn't smile. She walked straight to the counter and placed the crowbar on it with a loud clank. "Found this on my property last night," she said, her voice even. "Figured I'd return it." Silence. One of the younger men shifted uncomfortably. Clint, however, just smirked. "Don't know what you're talking about, Miss Simmons." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. "But maybe you ought to be careful out there, all alone. Lots of folks don't take kindly to outsiders." Ruth didn't blink. "That's so?" Clint tilted his head, his smirk widening. "That's so." A slow burn of rage simmered in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She had dealt with men like Clint all her life. The ones who smiled while they tried to push you down. The ones who thought intimidation was enough to make you back off. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a single shotgun shell, and placed it on the counter beside the crowbar. "Next time I catch someone sneaking onto my farm," she said, her voice steady, "I won't be aiming at the ground." A flicker of something passed over Clint's face. Surprise, maybe even respect. But he covered it quickly with another smirk. "Guess we'll see," he muttered. Ruth turned and walked out, leaving the door swinging behind her. She knew this wasn't over. Not yet. But she had made her message clear. And if they thought she was going to scare easy, they were dead wrong. For a few days, things were quiet. Too quiet. Ruth knew better than to think Clint and his boys had given up. Men like him never did. They just changed tactics. And sure enough, the next attack came, not in the dead of night, but in broad daylight. It started with a fire. Ruth had been tending to the goats when she smelled it, that sharp, acrid burn of something unnatural. She spun around just in time to see thick black smoke curling into the sky, the storage shed. She ran, her boots pounding against the dirt, adrenaline flooding her veins. The flames were already licking at the wooden walls, eating away at the structure she had built with her own hands. She grabbed the hose, turned it on full blast, and sprayed the flames, but she knew it was useless. The fire was too strong, too fast. She backed away, coughing, her eyes burning from the smoke. And that's when she saw it. The truck, sitting at the edge of her property, just far enough away to be innocent. A black pickup, engine running, two men inside, watching. Ruth wiped the soot from her face and squared her shoulders. They wanted her to break, to give up, to leave. She took a slow, deep breath, then turned on her heel and walked inside. She wasn't calling the sheriff. She was calling someone who could actually help. An hour later, she sat at her kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear. "I need a favor," she said. The voice on the other end chuckled. "Damn, Ruth, been a while." "Not long enough." The voice sobered. "What's going on?" Ruth glanced out the window at the smoldering remains of her shed. "Some men in town think they can run me off my land," she said. "I need to make sure they regret it." A pause. "Then I'm on my way." Ruth hung up and exhaled slowly. If Clint and his boys wanted a fight, they were about to get one. By sundown, Ruth heard the familiar rumble of an engine rolling up her dirt driveway. She stepped onto her porch, arms crossed as the old Chevy truck came to a stop. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped Marcus Tate. It had been years since she last saw him, but he hadn't changed much. Broad shoulders, sharp eyes, and that same no-nonsense energy he carried back when they worked together in corporate America. Back when they had to fight twice as hard to be seen, to be heard, to be taken seriously. He was the only one from that world she had stayed in touch with. Because Marcus, like her, knew what it meant to build something from nothing and to have people try to tear it down just because they could. He took one look at the charred remains of her shed and let out a slow breath. "Damn, Ruth," she smirked. "You said that already." Marcus shook his head. "Didn't think you'd be calling me for something like this." "You always did say I was too stubborn for my own good," he chuckled. "Still true." Then his face hardened. "Who did this?" Ruth filled him in. The theft, the trespassing, the threats, the fire. How Clint Weaver and his crew had been pushing her, testing her, waiting for her to break. Marcus listened, his jaw tightening. When she finished, he nodded. "All right, so what's the plan?" Ruth exhaled. "I don't plan on leaving." "Good, but I need to hit back, hard. Make sure they know they messed with the wrong woman." Marcus leaned against the truck, arms crossed. "You got cameras?" "Not yet." "Then that's step one. We set up surveillance. Catch 'em in the act." Ruth nodded. "And step two?" Marcus smirked. "We make sure they wish they never laid eyes on this farm." She arched a brow. "Marcus Tate, are you suggesting something illegal?" "Not illegal," he said, grinning. "Just strategic." Ruth felt a slow, satisfied smile spread across her face. If Clint and his boys wanted to play games, they had no idea what was coming. By the next night, Ruth and Marcus had everything in place. Cameras? Installed. Hidden in the trees, on the barn, even inside an old birdhouse by the gate. No more guessing who was sneaking onto her land. Deterrence? Set. Marcus had helped her reinforce the fences, but they didn't stop there. They laid down strips of rusty nails in the high grass by the property line, places only someone sneaking in would step. And then there was the trap. Marcus called it a little country justice. A carefully rigged mechanism on the back door of the barn. If someone tried to break in, they'd trigger a bucket of fermented goat manure to tip right onto their head. Sticky, unbearable, impossible to wash off quickly, and humiliating as hell. Then they waited. It didn't take long. At 2:13 a.m., Ruth's phone buzzed. Motion detected. She and Marcus sat up, eyes locked. He grabbed the monitor, pulled up the live feed. There they were. 3 men. One of them, big, slow-moving, was definitely Clint Weaver. Another was the younger guy from the feed store. The third looked like an outsider, someone Ruth didn't recognize. They crept toward the barn, crowbars in hand. Ruth's heartbeat pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. She nodded at Marcus. "Let's go." Time to finish this. They moved fast, keeping low. Marcus had insisted on a little surprise of his own, an old-school hunting spotlight. As soon as they were in position, he flipped the switch. A blinding beam lit up the night. The 3 men froze like deer. Then, bam! The barn door opened. Splat! The third man, the outsider, screamed as the bucket tipped, drenching him in weeks-old fermented manure. The stench hit the air like a weapon. Clint spun, but Ruth was already stepping forward, shotgun in hand, barrel pointed at the dirt. "I warned you," she said, voice cold. Marcus, standing beside her, crossed his arms. Guess y'all don't listen too good. The young one bolted first, gagging from the smell. The outsider, still retching, stumbled after him, desperate to get away. Clint hesitated, still trying to hold on to his pride. But when Ruth cocked the shotgun, he finally got the message. He spat on the ground. This ain't over. Ruth stepped closer. Oh, it is. You so much as step near my land again, I call the cops, and I hand over the footage. Clint's face twisted with anger, but he knew. They were done. He turned and limped into the night. Marcus chuckled. Well, that was fun. Ruth exhaled, lowering the gun. Damn right it was. She wasn't going anywhere, and now they knew it. For good. Woo! That was a ride. I don't know about y'all, but I was rooting for her the whole time. Justice served. Now tell me, was she too soft, too harsh, or just right? Would you have done things differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read all of them. And hey, if you love this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because trust me, we've got even more wild stories coming your way. Smash that like button if you enjoyed this, and I'll catch y'all in the next one.